All right. I guess first off, I just wanted to thank both of you guys for taking the time and being willing to sort of talk through your experience. And just to set the stage briefly for anybody who might see this or listen to it who doesn't know, last weekend we were all on the Canyons of the Southwest trip, and on the throughout the weekend we teach folks sort of how to contingency plan, what to do if your aircraft goes down, and how to get found, and what you can expect, and how to turn that into a success. And I'm going to let you guys tell the story. But on your way home, when the trip was complete, the thing that hasn't happened in 13 years, um, your engine quit and you guys went down out there. Um, can maybe one of you or both of you in turn sort of talk us through what happened?
So Francisco, you or Fernando, you want to do it, or you want me to take it?
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So we departed Monument Valley Airport, UT 25, Uniform Tango 25, and began a climb. We were heading back to Boulder City Airport outside of Las Vegas, and began to climb up to 8,500 feet. That was our cruise altitude, and so we got up to 8,500, straight and level. Everything was fine. And then we started getting fluctuations on the oil pressure gauge. And it has a Garmin 275 in it, so a little needle that goes from right to left. And it was fluctuating and going to zero for, what do you think, Fernando? Maybe 1 or 2 seconds, and then it would go back to normal, and then it would go back to zero. And it was just kind of jumping all over the place. Would you concur with that, Fernando?
Yep.
So we thought, well, that has the potential to not be good. So we started a climb up to 10,500 feet, and um, uh, finally got close to 10,500 feet, leveled out, and the oil pressure normalized. It stayed green, and life was good. And it probably flew that way for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And then we heard a pop from the engine, and the RPMs immediately went from 2,200 down to about 1,200, 1,300 RPM.
Wow. Wow.
So,
And
uh,
even if I could stop you briefly right there before the story goes on, um, was this accompanied by anything in the engine at this point, or was it simply that indication?
well, I mean, we cross-checked the cylinder head temperatures. I mean, if the oil pressure was out or if the engine was out of oil, you would think that the CHTs would start rising. And the CHT stayed normal on all 6 cylinders. We looked
And
at
the
the
oil temperature, by the way, too, right? So again, I would associate an oil temperature rise if the pressure goes down.
Yeah.
Another interesting thing about it is after a while, I don't remember if it's exactly the way you described it just now. So, but yeah, it was doing the fluctuations, and then there was a couple of times where it went to zero and it just kind of stuck there for a bit. So that became disconcerting.
Yeah.
Um,
So you
and
guys,
that's
you guys add a little bit of altitude. Are you looking around at this point? Like if the engine quits, we're going here or we're going there, or did it not seem that imminent?
No, I mean, when you're cannon flying, I think you're always probably either consciously or subconsciously looking for a place to land.
Yeah.
Um, but no, I mean, I don't think we were doing, Fernando, like an active scan for, oh, there's a place. I don't remember us doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Interesting.
mean, there was
Okay.
a.
Well, yeah. Sorry. Go
I was
ahead,
going to say
Fernando.
this in my mind. It was kind of like starting to go down a thought, but yeah, like Joe said, I don't think we were concerned yet, and I think for a while, and I'll tell you about where that changed. I think it was always a thought that at least we can get to Page.
Right.
Right.
All right. So all of a sudden you lose power.
Well, and by the way, before that, we had been trying to contact Denver Center to get flight following and didn't get a response. So wasn't sure if we were out of radio range or what. But anyway, so then the engine popped and immediately lost RPM. The engine did not seize up or stop. We still had partial power, but it was between 12, 13, 1400 RPM. So we were unable to maintain altitude, and so started flying at best glide speed and turned straight towards Page Airport. But the airplane couldn't hold altitude. It was descending at, what do you think, Fernando? 400 feet a minute,
Yeah, I think
somewhere.
that's what we were gauging. Yeah, and this is where like Joe was flying once he asked for the checklist, and a cool thing about the Canyon camp is I'll tell you like my mindset as a CFI is he was doing just fine, and I felt like I could help him by monitoring and kind of help him with the situation. So I was like, you know what, he's doing great, and we had just gone through an entire weekend of building trust with each other, and honestly, that was like popped into my brain. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, and
when
so kudos to you, really, because you really let Joe fly through the whole crash landing.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know. To be honest with you now, like I imagine to myself, like some CFIs would be like, I know like when you're doing private pilots training and things like that, the normal brief is, if there's an emergency, I'll take over and we'll, find our best place to land, that kind of stuff. And in this case, I kind of felt like the best thing I could do is he was completely in control of flying it. He was doing a good job. He asked me for the checklist right away. And I was like, great, I can actually monitor the situation and do other stuff like get air traffic control on the line and start coordinating the rest of the stuff as well as just kind of monitor what we're doing.
wow,
I feel like that
that's
was the
fantastic. That
decision.
was sorry. Go ahead.
I was just about to say, I feel like that was one of the better decisions I made.
Yeah, 100%. It sounds like you guys had amazing teamwork, great crew resource management. There was no fighting over anything. That sounds like, Fernando, that was an incredibly wise decision. It was also one of the questions that Chris had sent me. Did flying together the prior few days make a difference in how you guys interacted? But it sounds like it did, because you trusted Joe as a pilot and you were able to just support that and make it a success, which is awesome.
Yeah, I think that our flying over the last 2 or 3 days developed a certain degree of CRM between the two of us, and that worked out pretty well. And
Yeah.
that proved to help us when right after we knew that we were losing or not able to maintain altitude, and we were gonna lose altitude. I handed Fernando the checklist. He read off the checklist. We went through that, and then he started. It was interesting. He immediately after that, I think he immediately called Denver Center and declared an emergency, and they came right up. So and started talking.
Of course
So
they did. Not now the secret's out, right?
yeah,
Well, that was another question that Chris had. And let's see if I covered it. Oh yeah, would any checklist have given you a different outcome? So it sounds like you guys ran the appropriate checklist. So that was, I guess, engine failure in flight for that plane.
Yep.
is that
I'll,
the one we did, Fernando? Was it engine?
it is.
Swear to God, I'm
It
not
is.
sure.
Yeah. No, that's the procedure we did, and it was interesting because like with all of the instructors, and obviously you always have a great cast of characters, if you will, like amazingly experienced instructors, and so the various texts and questions and stuff like that. And Chris was one of them. There's a handful of things that I thought through, and I was like, man, did I do that? Did I not? Or why didn't I do that? Because there's some
Mm-hmm.
things that I know I didn't, but actually thinking through it, there was actually reasons, and me and Joe had a little conversation about it about like there's some things like for instance shutting the engine off before we landed, but would be a normal right. Did I do a forced landing checklist? And actually talking through it, we're like, well, wait a minute, like the engine was making power, and we wanted to milk it for everything it had.
Yeah.
That's
So
right.
things
Because
like pulling the prop for less drag was things we didn't go. So we're kind of getting ahead though, but at the time of this part with the checklist, running through the checklist, you check your gas selector valve, you check your mixture, then you go to check the magnetos, and we kind of went click, 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 like we didn't want to mess with the motor. So we went through the checklist, and I distinctly remember like, okay, we're good. And then we started thinking about where to go,
Yeah.
and then again because he was flying, I was able to like, I think, I feel like I can credit some of what happened over the course of after the landing because we did have some extra brain bites, and I was able to, I think, have an intelligent thought with air traffic control as opposed to sometimes they're kind of non-coherent when I
Mm-hmm.
think through some of the accident reports that I read or the There I Was podcast from AOPA and things like that. And so I got all the information out. They responded right away. They started asking the normal questions, trying to help us to get to page, and then right about the time I got that coordination out, then Joe, this is where it hit. Joe goes, we're not going to make it. And it
Wow.
became obvious because,
well,
we were
Page
losing
was what,
about
23 miles.
500 foot a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
23 miles.
15 minutes. Yeah. Not far, but too far. That's interesting, Fernando. And just to give you some perspective, don't feel bad about, being honest, I think about anything you did off the checklist, just because one of the lectures I saw early in my flying career was at Oshkosh, a guy that ended up ditching a 210 next to a ferry. So he had like video of the ditching and everybody was okay. And there were two key checklist items that he missed, but those two things, because he did not do them, saved everybody's life.
Oh
And
wow.
I always think about it now. Like, it was locking the baggage door. He failed to lock the baggage door. And the other one was he failed to open the doors before impact. And at the end of the day, the minute he did open the doors, the plane did a nosedive for the bottom, and the girl in the back panicked and tried to swim up through it. And he opened the baggage door and pulled her out. Like, there were all these like real world things that really stuck with me. So you guys have a really valuable story to tell. And
Yeah. Like I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, like we always teach like the ABCs. It's a pretty common, what to do when there's got an engine failure
right,
or the startle effect, and then do that. And I'm
right.
like, never even thought about the ABCs. And I'm like, I always teach them. Never, we did them. We actually, Joe, if you think back, we did that. He barked at me, what's my best airspeed? We started thinking
Right,
about it,
right.
and we found a couple of plateaus ahead of us until we knew which one was probably going to be it.
Yeah.
And then we got to a checklist. So we naturally did it, but that was out the window. And I kind of, that's something for myself. Like there's a handful of things that I've gotten, and I used to fly fighters. So I've got this like perfection thing in my mind, which I have to actually fight a little bit,
Yeah.
because a successful outcome, the reality was, we didn't get to the end of the Swiss cheese model, and we did a lot of good things, and there were enough good things to overcome anything bad that was going on when we made it out of there.
Yeah, yeah. And you committed to it. There's so much research about it's really the reason that twin engine airplanes have a worse fatality rate in engine failures, is because it's hard to commit. There's a lot of options, you guys
Well,
once.
it wasn't. I don't think there was a whole lot of debate about the commitment, because we knew we weren't going to make an airport, and
Yeah,
the terrain all around us was pretty severe.
I saw
So,
that. Yeah.
we had maybe one. I think, Fernando, two different choices that we were going to try to make, and
Yep.
ultimately we just decided on the one that we landed at. And it's so interesting, because we were talking, and I think we determined it was 6 minutes from the time that the engine popped until we stopped,
Wow.
and it felt like about 20 seconds.
Yeah, I bet. I
It
bet.
was, it
Did
was
you arrive there with any altitude, or did you just time it and feel it correctly? I mean, did you have to circle it all? Did you put yourself in a base leg? Or, I mean, can you sort of talk us through what you were thinking as you were flying into it?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously the descent, and then we made the decision where we were going to land, there was some trepidation about whether or not we were going to be able to make this mesa. I remember us having that conversation vividly.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I mean, and if you didn't make it, it would have been. I mean, there
well,
was
if
nowhere
we
else
didn't
to go.
make it, then we were going to have to go to the side of the mesa and then down into a canyon, and that would have changed our whole day probably.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
no, I didn't. We didn't circle. We didn't. I mean, if you look at the track log on it, we made about a Fernando, 20-degree turn to the right. We're going over there, and then we just kind of flew to it. We didn't put in any flaps, and I remember thinking in my head, oh, am I supposed to put in flaps in this situation or not? And we didn't put any flaps, and because we weren't sure that we were going to make the mesa.
Yeah,
Um,
and there's with options like that, I'm sure there's no consideration of what the wind is doing, right? Like you
no,
guys just
no,
are sitting on top of a little table there,
it wouldn't matter what the wind was doing. I mean,
right?
Yeah.
we had one.
I thought about what you were saying, and it would be nice to actually, do an approach. Ideally, you'd have to like to hit a 90 or at least a base, or if not, be able to fly over something in 180 with
Hmm.
about 900 feet to circle. All of those things are like those again, like ABCs. They're like those textbook technique. But the reality is, we were stretching our glide. Again, watching him, good decisions. Like he kept the flaps out. There was, and Joe, I remember you were describing it as the pucker factor, as we were staring at kind of the edge of that ridge line.
Yeah,
You know that feeling when you're coming close to the underrun, getting ready for landing, and you're kind of assessing to yourself, "Yeah, I'm going to make it. I'm going to make it." And part of that assessment is, when do I pull power because landing's made.
Yeah.
In this case, I think we were both going, but he was still making best glide. So at 70, we had a little bit of a pitch authority to shallow it right before, which I don't know if you saw that, Joe, but you kind of just naturally did that a little bit. Like part of that is I want to make this mesa. But in
Yeah.
the end, we definitely had airspeed and a little bit of authority because we made it. I think we assessed we made it probably about 300 to 500 feet into the mesa is
Yeah.
where the touchdown was. And so that, all that ended up, it was concerning looking at the tip of that ridge line, but in the end, we actually were able to clear it with a little bit of spare.
Yeah, a little bit of spare room, and then as soon as we got over the edge of the mesa, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Fernando, but that's when we dumped the flaps in
Yeah.
and then just
Yeah,
tried to hold it off as much as we could.
No flaps until we were about to touch down, and then he dumped the flaps, which was good, and all that stuff was awesome. And then here's the next fun part about happy that we made the decision to let him fly is because he was so focused and he got us there, which was awesome. I had like 2 extra brain bites, and I was really closely monitoring the left edge and the right edge. And if you look at this terrain, which I'm assuming we're going to maybe splice in a little bit of the imagery of kind of where it was and how it happened.
Yeah. We'll be able to see it. Yeah.
There was a big like bend into
Yep.
the left edge that actually we were kind of pointing towards a little bit, like maybe the left wheel, maybe more, but definitely I was like a little quick, one of those faces of death thoughts in my brain of I don't want to roll off that left side. And I kind of barked a little bit. It was like, go to the right. And he kicked the right boot of rudder.
And I'm so glad he did because I was focused on straight ahead and trying to see if there was an obstacle coming up.
Yeah.
I wasn't even looking right and left. And he noticed that we were getting dangerously close to the left edge of the mesa as we were bouncing on this landing. And so I think we just kicked in right rudder and a little bit of right aileron as we were coming to a stop there. And that helped. You can see the dirt tracks that we looked at, and they curve a little bit to the right before we came.
In the track file, you actually notice the airplane kind of kick over. Of course, it's a 4-flight track file, but it actually recorded it, I think, pretty accurately.
Wow. And so what was the impact like, or the touchdown rather?
I was about to describe that, because we're talking about it. It was more of a rollout. It was kind of hard packed dirt. It was a little squishy, like in different places, maybe to get to like the soles of your shoes, but nothing more than that. But there was definitely some rocks embedded into that dirt, and so we were kind of like on a little bit of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride where it was smooth enough. I don't believe we even had a prop strike. I think we rolled out for a while. It was kind of a little bumpy and kind of bouncing around. He kicked over to the right, and I'm actually also amazed that kicking the right rudder and a little bit of aileron, he didn't. I don't believe he touched the wingtip. So he kind of kicked over. The rescue guys measured the tracks and estimated that we probably took about 300 yards. Probably could have honked on the brakes a little bit, but we were probably kind of seeing how it was going. And then finally, I think we smacked into 2 maybe 5-inch diameter, like sort of short Joshua trees. Mm-hmm. I think they hit our strut because there was a little bit of damage to the strut, but none to the wing. And then he honked on the brakes, and I think you said you remember it like the nose tire hitting a rock probably because in the end he hit the brakes, the nose gear. It looks like the strut collapsed, the tire got flat, and then it dug in, and then we stopped.
And the rim of the nose wheel is bent. And I found the rock. I took a picture of it. Found the rock where the nose wheel. It's got tire marks on it. So I think that's what collapsed the nose strut and flattened the tire.
Wow. And it's so amazing to me that just like days before this, we're listening to Peter talk about crashing his plane on a fjord. And now here you guys are, telling this story. Unbelievable. Wow. So I saw pictures of the aircraft and it doesn't look that badly damaged. Have you heard anything about it? Is it still sitting out there? Do you guys know what's happening?
To my knowledge, it's been a couple of phone calls. I think Joe's gotten one of them from the NTSB rep, but as you know, when we were at Page, the sheriff was there and he was waiting. So kind of on the reporting side, the sheriff was there and he said he was tasked by the rescue center to call an FAA rep, and the FAA rep connected us to an NTSB rep, and we basically had a conference call, and that was the beginning of the reporting right there before we went anywhere. Yeah. Since then, they have emailed me and contacted me kind of as the CFI on the airplane to be like kind of primary information. But Joe said he got I think you said a call or an email as well.
Yeah, I got a call yesterday from a guy at the Las Vegas FISDO,
Oh,
kind of asking me preliminary information, but letting me know that I would get another call from an inspector within the next week to go deep on the narrative. So
yeah, that's actually interesting because I'm in the FISDO as a fast team fast team member.
Wow.
He
Wow.
called Joe, but that's all good. Like it's all working. And then the other calls
Oh, man.
were a couple from the club, but that's really informational. But the insurance calling in, and from what I can tell, NTSB actually looked at the damage on the airplane, and aside from a scratch on Joe's left elbow, they're saying there's no injuries, so he might actually kick it back to the FAA. So we'll see how that
Wow.
plays out. Obviously, more to follow. So that's interesting. He was, a great thing about everybody in this process is how their first attitude is gratefulness that they're able to talk to us about the incident as opposed to some of the things they have to deal with some days, and I can
Yeah.
appreciate that big time.
yeah,
The insurance, he sounded like, well, I've never done this before. I'm not sure how we're going to get it out of there, but I have a budget for recovery, so I guess maybe that's what we're going to do. And,
Yeah.
and then finally, the rescue guys told us that the common thing they see, they're Arizona Public Safety, the helicopter crew, and they said
Yeah.
that usually what they see is a helicopter sling loading a wreckage out. Although in this case, insurance and everybody were saying, "Oh, this airplane may actually get recovered and fly again."
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I could see that. I could see that. So when you were going through that, like at like post touchdown, the right rudder, all of that stuff, Joe, were you able to even process any of the stuff? Were you able to even process any of the stuff that sorry were you able to process any of the stuff that Peter was trying to tell us about dissipating energy, or was it just like, here I am, hang on?
no, I just remember, once we dumped the flaps in and thinking, we're kind of along for the ride now,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And trying to come to a stop, and it was a rough ride because there was these little rock outcroppings,
yeah,
and we kept hitting in the little brush stuff. So it was a pretty rough ride. Uh, but I do, and then I remember thinking after maybe that nose wheel hit the rock, I thought, oh, I should probably apply the brakes now. And um,
yeah,
so I was a little late to the game on that. But
yeah.
no, I mean you're just trying to get the
Survive
airplane
it.
stopped and minimize any damage. I remember us getting Fernando. Do you remember there was one time we hit something and it really kind of shoved us forward like that, and maybe that was that nose wheel hitting that rock.
I
I
feel
don't
that
know.
was the rock, and the trees. The trees helped a lot. They're like 5 inch
You
diameter,
guys just
maybe.
froze
They
up.
weren't
Wow,
big
those are
trees.
fairly
Dissipated
large.
our energy. They dissipated our energy pretty good.
Huh. And then there you are. Then all of a sudden the airplane comes to a stop. I'm assuming you guys get out. There's the risk of fire. But it must be the quietest moment in the world when there you are on the top of some mesa in the middle of nowhere.
Well, what
I
was
think
what was interesting is that once we came to a stop and we got out of the aircraft, and we were like, wow, we just did that and went through it, and probably 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes later, we start looking around. It's like, God, it's beautiful out here. This is
Yeah.
really pretty. Um, uh, and it was. I mean, it was beautiful scenery.
Yeah.
And I mean, at that point, what was really cool afterwards that I think helped reassure us is that neither one of us were injured. Um,
Yeah.
Number two, we had cell phone service.
Wow.
Number three, we had two guys that flew over us from the airplane camp.
Yeah.
So it was never a question of, oh, are we going to spend 5 days out here in the backcountry?
Right. Right.
I remember, it was 3 hours from the time that we landed until the helicopter came and picked us up. I mean, I changed my Southwest flight while I was sitting out there because I knew I wasn't going to make my 2 o'clock flight out of Vegas.
Right. No, I know. Well, that's when I think of, there were so many things that were lucky. Had it happened on Saturday in some of the places we go, the remote places when the crew's more spread out, it might have been a whole different scenario.
Yeah.
But it was right around this time that I first became aware of it, because I got a text from Jimena saying there's an aircraft down 20 miles east of Page, and I think it's one of ours. That was like the first thing I heard. But shortly thereafter, Fernando, you texted me and said we just had an off-airport landing and we're both okay. So, from that, once I knew you guys were okay, it was a matter of finding you. Which was kind of interesting. I mean, I think I told you, Fernando, because you had cell service, you shared your location with me, and I thought, oh, this will be easy. So we first flew toward the location on the phone, but that took us in a wild goose chase. We would have ended up, I don't know, 15 miles north of you guys at the base of Navajo Mountain. We were kind of searching that meadow. And right when we arrived over where that dot was, it shifted on the screen, and said, oh, it's 7 minutes away now. So I thought, oh, this isn't going to work. So fortunately, you heard us, right? We kind of doubled back to the original line, the 085, I think, off Page, and you heard us and were able to guide us in, saying, you guys are too far west, fly east. Sorry, the other way around, too far east, fly west. And we did that. I have video of a little bit of the search. I was just trying to hold a GoPro out the window just to sort of show folks, like, it's not all that easy when you don't know what you're looking for and you have this massive like wilderness, even if kind of where people are within 20 miles or something. But ultimately you guys hit us with the signal mirror, which made me so proud.
Yeah.
I don't know if we got it on the footage. I looked briefly today, and unfortunately I don't think we do, but it was in the airplane. It was bright, and you guys lit right up. Were you able to initiate?
That was good timing on that, because we had just been trained on that in the survival, presentation, 2 days earlier.
Yeah, right. And that's the thing that for me is so, and not just me, but I think Peter and probably you, Fernando, and, like, we've been doing these things for a lot of years, and it's just validating to see some of this stuff, like one of the things, for example, that we teach, the Howard lecture about one unexpected night out, and the stat that we get from the Tahoe Nordic Search and Rescue, that if you have a flight plan and if you have a PLB and if everybody knows where you are, it's probably 24 to 36 hours in most cases. And if nobody knows where you are, and it's just sort of like a Steve Fawcett situation, it's like 3 days, like 3 to 5 days, if you're lucky, if you ever get found. And so the helicopter guys, we were chatting with them a little bit, and they were validating that, just saying, like, everything was perfect. You guys were 10 minutes from Page. Like you said, Joe, we're part of a group, so everybody knew where you were instantly. You'd just been trained on the signal mirrors. We found you right away. We got your lat long, and boom. So I walked into, this is going to be kind of just a sort of interesting breakdown of how the helicopter thing worked. I didn't know for sure that if you had initiated a rescue, if you called 911 or whatever. I took the lat long I had and just went into Classic Aviation, which was a search and rescue helicopter I'd seen departing a day or two before, and just gave them the lat long and said, my friends are here. Can you guys go? And, they got me to the right spot. And when I told them where it was, and oh no, Fernando, you and I were texting, you said there's something coming out of Kingman, right? So there's like jurisdictions, depending on where you go down, there are different people that pick you up, is I guess my understanding. And this was the Department of Public Safety from Kingman. Super professional guys, by the way, for anybody. And I don't know if we have photos of these guys, but they were like former Army Rangers. I think they were like, top notch, top of their game. Anyway, so were you able to initiate that with center before you touched down? Is that why you had it, or did you call 911 on the ground?
So I was going to say that. So a couple things. One is I think it was great that again, to a fly-in. So with the coordination with center before we lost radio, I had the a couple brain bites. So I was able to get on my ForeFlight, and I was able to measure from Page, and I had an accurate I think it was 22.2 miles east of Page on a 085, which is what I was able to text you that when we landed, because it was in my mind, because I told air traffic control that. That plus the ADSB, it turns out the end of the flight aware or ADSB track pretty much pointed at our Mesa when we lost track. So that was a cool thing. And then another part was because of the air traffic control coordination that we were able to, with the two of us, that we were able to accomplish. They were ready. So they were on the radio. After we landed, the ELT went off. So that was going off on guard, which as a lesson learned, that clutters up your guard. I'm hard pressed to tell somebody to turn off your ELT. But I think we had enough things going for us. So it was probably a couple moments I might have been able to, because I had a handheld radio. But when you're next to the ELT with your handheld radio, it's wicked loud to have guard going off. So anyway, that's kind of almost a funny thing that happened. But we had other frequencies we got to later, and I'll get to that in a minute. The point being is that air traffic control was able to then have information to then start checking to see if anybody knew anything about a downed aircraft and those kind of things. So that leads to Ben Samra, who's from our crew. Him and Kevin had just finished gassing up at Page. So they were taking off. In fact, they took off at 10:08. They actually took off out of Page. 6 minutes before we landed. So it was interesting because he overlaid our flight log with his flight log. They had taken off there. He said they were about 20 miles west of Page. And when they clicked over to center to try to get flight following, they heard the tail end of center calling, asking to see if anybody was aware of, could hear an ELT, or could try to help locate a downed aircraft. So they just started heading over. And when they were able to get an edgewise, he said they called him and they gave him a location, last known location of the track file. They gave us, the bearing that I gave. And then they headed that way. He said he passed over the ridge, and as soon as he did, they heard the ELT immediately. And so then he headed south. And of course, we were on the edge of the ridge line. So he was able to fly over us and actually find us on his first paths. That was, I think we wrote it down because I was talking to him about kind of what his experience was. I think that was at 10:44. So it was literally right at 30 minutes after we had landed. So that was. I'm saying all that because just from the air traffic control coordination, I haven't got to the Garmin part and actually using my ELT, my PLB. That was super comforting to have somebody eyeballs on you and locate you. And it was like really cool at the time. The fun part is because we were on the camp, he flew right over us. So we're like, oh, he can see us, and we didn't use our mirror. So he reported air traffic control that he saw the airplane, but he wasn't sure if they could see us. And they in hindsight, they zoomed in their pictures and their videos, and they saw us under the wing. And he figured it wasn't somebody from the camp because nobody's flashing with a mirror. So I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, that's not well. And I got a call. How long was it after we landed that I got a call from Air Force Search and Rescue and said,
"Yep."
Yeah,
I've got that timing too. I was kind of looking at that. So back to that's kind of the pre-coordination and how it benefited us. When we landed, I remember looking. He looked at me. We're like, "You okay?" "Yep, I'm okay." And then we started unstrapping and starting to get out of the airplane. So that was cool. He also had the wherewithal to shut the airplane down now, fuel and the electrical and all that stuff. So that was cool. And again, more confidence builder for me. So we were just kind of getting out, and now we're two pilots. In fact, I'll say this now. I felt like all the way through that experience to this point that we were just two pilots getting through it. And I thought that was pretty cool. And we got out and we were doing the same thing. Like, what do you got? What do I got? He started to see he had cell phone coverage. I inventoried my stuff. And of course, we're in this flying camp. So I had some of my gear. I had my, I had my, fire equipment for survival if we needed it. We had extra water, which was, obviously smart. I had a handheld radio, which was obviously smart, and I had a Garmin InReach Messenger, which as soon as I took a look down, I was like, "Huh, I should use this thing." And I actually flipped that button off that I keep trying to not hit, and I actually hit that button, and it was really easy. It goes off. It started kind of beeping at me, saying SOS messages is in effect, and I believe it was at a time somewhere around 5 or 6 minutes later, we actually got a phone call from Garmin service. And they're doing like search and rescue normally does. So I think they were taking that role on, and they said, "Hey, we got an SOS message. Are you guys in an emergency?" And so they were able to verify, "Yep, we're in an emergency." And they go, "Okay, we have your location. What's your status? Are you guys hurt?" And we started to go through, and they stayed on the phone with me until I was able to talk with 911 and the local county emergency services. So that was all cool because we got all that information out. that was probably, I don't know, probably ended up being about a 2-minute phone call.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, we'll hang up. We'll save your battery. About, I'm going to guess right now, about 5 minutes after that, then Joe got a call because they had both of our contact information, and that was from actual rescue center.
Yeah.
So we're like, I think the ticking the boxes on, like, if everybody you'd want to know where you're at is getting notified. And I think it was comforting to, we had an airplane fly over. We were starting to get these phone calls from the actual people who would rescue us.
Mhm.
You flew over after that, and you were going to Page to coordinate stuff for us. So
Yeah.
things started lining up. And I think both good coordination with ATC combined with the fact that we had two actual communication devices
Yeah.
and very fortuitous cell phone signal made a big difference.
Yeah, it's interesting. It makes me think, the first thing they said to me when I walked in is that I should call 911. That's what the rescue helicopter said to me. And then I told him you had cell service, and they said, well, he should call 911. And it makes me think of what some of the things that Howard says in the lectures during the camp. Like, if you have a minute, just dial 911 while you're going down. And I think what I'm hearing from you guys, and what just stuff to think about for other pilots, is just throw the kitchen sink at it. Whatever you have, hit the Garmin, coordinate with ATC, dial 911 if you have a minute on the way down. Just, because at the end of the day, Peter said he had the phone number for the Air Force Rescue Center, and they hold the reins to everything. So no matter how many times this gets, no matter what portals you go through, Garmin, ATC, whatever, it's going to come under one coordinated rescue effort, and they're going to assign the local people. Peter actually called them just to see if there was a rescue in progress, and they verified there was. So
That's a good point, because I distinctly remember not thinking at all about calling 911 while we were landing.
yeah,
Uh,
because I think, Howard says that in the mountains, like if you're going into a valley, maybe at altitude, you'll have just a little ping, and like just some breadcrumb for somebody to go on.
you know, the takeaway for me on that is that would be great to have on the emergency checklist, right?
Yeah.
Call 911.
Yeah. I mean, these days, right? Why not? And just hold your phone, emergency
I'm
call.
pretty sure that the initial part of the coordination, when they said they were contacting us with county, was actually the 911, because they told us, you said, okay, when you're done, we're going to let you save your battery. If you have any changes to your situation, the two things they said was rehit your SOS on your Garmin and call 911, because you'll get right back to us. And so I perceived that to be either the people that 911 would talk to, or it actually was 911 in the middle of this whole thing as part of the communication. But regardless, like, it seems like those parts were all working out.
Yeah. And it was fascinating for what it's worth. You hear stories sometimes about rescues costing tens of thousands of dollars, 30,000, 40,000, whatever. So just for what it's worth, the Department of Public Safety they just rescue you free. That's like what they do, tax dollars. They just go out there, and we've paid for that service. So that was amazing. Those guys were amazing.
Yep.
And apparently the search and rescue helicopter that I was able to help dispatch only charges if you're injured. So had you guys not done such a stellar job of that off airport landing, who knows? But yeah, so we had 2 helicopters out there, got you guys back. Anything else you want to tell us about before the helicopters arrived, or when they arrived, or anything from
No,
there?
I mean, it was like I said earlier, it was 3 hours of just sitting around waiting, and they sent us text update that said, "Hey, the helicopter has departed. It's en route," and they gave us an ETA via text,
Yeah.
so we knew that help was coming. And so we called our significant others and told them what happened, and that was a kind of a surreal thing, but.
Yeah.
But yeah, then it was just a matter of waiting. And I knew we had plenty of water, we had snacks, we knew we weren't going to be out there, days and days.
Right.
So,
And yeah, I think it's like it's a shot across the bow for all of us, even those of us that are flying in these courses regularly. It's you could really imagine, and this wasn't the case for you guys, but you could really imagine that, let's say you were traversing with your family or something, and it wasn't a large group. And maybe you did or didn't file a flight plan. Maybe you didn't file a flight plan because you had a Garmin, but you're not on flight following. And then it happens and you're out there and everything's fine in the landing. but all you have is that button, and you push that button and you don't know if that's it. You just push that button and you're for sure waiting for what, 24 to 36 hours without
Yeah.
leaving the crash site. When people talk about not leaving the crash site, and of course Howard does a lecture on our mountain trip, mostly I think about how it's sometimes appropriate, it's sometimes not. It's not a black and white thing. But you can imagine, I'm sure you guys, from the silence of what happens after, just sitting there for 24 hours wondering whether or not that Garmin InReach actually got the message out. No cell service maybe. It just yeah, it's something to really think through.
I mean, having cell service changed the whole dynamic
Yeah,
of the situation.
right.
Sure. And I will tell you this, and I'll mention this as an aside. Um, when I took off, when we took off from Monument Valley back to Vegas, I was wearing shorts and just a shirt, and I was wearing Hey Dudes for shoes.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, after we landed and we got out of the airplane, and I started walking around. I mean, you realize pretty quick that's that's not the right footwear for flying out in that environment. And so, open up my suitcase, put on the boots and the whole thing. But I mean, the takeaway and just little minutia stuff like that. But what if I had been injured? What if Fernando had been injured? What if the plane was, what if my luggage was strewn all over the place? And now I'm stuck wearing Hey Dudes for 3 days out in the middle of the desert, just stuff like that, that I should have been better prepared and probably dressed more appropriately for.
Yeah. No, 100%. And, but again, and we know that it's like, Richard, my mentor, who I give so much credit to, really, when we did emergency training, it was like he used every trick in the book to try to make me believe that this was truly what was going to happen. Like, this was it. We're going to take off right now in the next 10 minutes of our life. The engine's going to fail and we're going to go talk to the NTSB. And it's like, that was the mindset that he would try to get me into. And it's like, it was a beautiful ideal, but you don't always stay there, as a pilot. And I think what you guys showed us and what this story that you're telling is a good reminder for everybody to take this stuff seriously. And what you just said, Joe, dress for the environment you're flying over. Flying is more adventurous, I think, than we give ourselves credit for a lot of times, with these nice warm cockpits where you can sort of block out the elements. You could fly over the mountains at night in the snow if you so desire, and it's warm with your heater. But at the end of the day, you're flying over what you're flying over. And with one engine, if it quits, there you are.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely true.
Yeah.
A couple, you were asking about any other things. Like, it's weird because I don't want it to be just a Garmin and ForeFlight commercial, but truthfully, like, just having tools that we were able to use that helped us out, to give Garmin some props. And I was actually going to send them probably a social media post or something. Like, so Garmin started, they gave us a call again. I got a call about 5 minutes in. My wife got a call shortly after that, my emergency contact. So that was good. And, for those of us that are married or have been married for any amount of time, at the same time, she got a little startled. Of course, I was, in the military, deployed a number of times. And so she's seen different other types of notifications that the military does. And when she got the notice, the good thing was they said, hey, we've got an SOS from your husband. He's okay. They're not hurt. We're coordinating, blah, blah, blah. So that was alarming and then immediately comforting. And then the other thing is the Garmin message center called her or messaged her on a regular basis, giving her updates.
Oh, that's great.
And that helped out quite a bit for her, being on the other end of this whole thing. So I guess it's two things, having that emergency contact and making sure you have it updated. So it's not something from like 10 years ago and it's an ex-girlfriend or somebody who's no longer your friend or something.
Yeah.
I'd say keep those emergency contacts updated. And then again, being able to use even after the fact, like right now, I'm able to use my ForeFlight track log, and I've been doing a number of questions and answers with friends and other instructors, and then me and Joe have gone over a couple pieces of it. Ben was instrumental again with some of the things that he did, so I was able to review pieces of it, and so that track log has been pretty valuable to me right now since it happened, on being able to dissect little pieces. And I guess I'm kind of thankful that I had that going. I had my Sentry going. I think it's helped us out a little bit for thinking through what we went through.
Yeah, that's great. And for me, it's been It's just been amazing validation of what we're doing out there. It's
Yeah.
like, to be totally honest, it's a bit of a shot across the bow in terms of liability as well. So, I really had to do a lot of soul searching, thinking about, we've been really fortunate since 2013 running these trips, but I almost feel like I want to double down in the commitment to bring this education forward, because everything from, controlling the crash to the macro scale of staying found with, personal locator beacons, excuse me. Hey. To the micro scale, and everything that allowed this to be a success. I feel like if people don't know these things and they're out there flying without those contingency plans, it could be a totally different situation. So,
Yeah. I think it was one of the takeaways that I had too. You always train, or as you're in your pilot career, you're always training for bad things happening, and you always wonder if you ever had an engine out or in a certain scenario, if you're going to be able to how you're going to react to that situation. And they even talked about that in your training out there, Jason, about what was it, Fernando? 10%, just 10% of the pilots just cave, and then
yeah,
10%, step up. I don't
yeah,
remember the stats, but
yeah. It's Howard's. Yeah, basically, I think it's like 20 out of 100 are going to do the right thing.
yeah, and it was interesting that I and Fernando, you may feel differently. I just didn't feel like we had time to think about that stuff, right? I mean, it was about flying the plane and making as safe a landing as we could, and so it was interesting because I thought about it in retrospect. I thought, man, I wonder if I should have given control of the airplane to Fernando, or should we have changed, just all the Monday morning quarterback stuff. But it's reassuring to know that, I mean, one of the takeaways is that if I'm ever in that emergency again, well, apparently we're going to be able to fly the plane. I'm not going to cave and just give up. So
100%. No, you guys did a fantastic job. All the credit to both of you. In the mindset of Monday morning quarterbacking, is there anything that you would have done differently, that you would do differently now? I mean, is there anything that keeps you up at night at all?
I'll let
should
you
have put,
go first.
should have put my boots on at Monument Valley before I left.
Hey, if that's all it is, man, that's pretty good.
So you
We
know what? Oh, go ahead. Did you have something,
no
Jones?
no that's it. Go ahead.
So like we just finished a flying camp, and so the myriad of CFIs and pilots, and I got a bunch of messages and stuff. And Joe, I'm not sure if any of you folks. My son finally decided to post it on Facebook yesterday. I think it was yesterday or Monday afternoon. So I started getting messages through that. A couple of interesting questions that I'll go ahead and hit up. Not hitting the ABCs. I talked about that. Like I feel like it should have been automatic. It didn't do it. We naturally did it, and I don't think people should rely on that. So in my mind, I'm like, shoot, like I could practice emergencies. Flying in the military, we used to have a thing called emergency of the day, and so just if you think about it, I'd say review a checklist. If you think about anytime you get a chance, or if you want, make it a challenge. I actually instituted in case anybody wanted to do it. I'm not sure if people at the flying club that I'm at do it, but I have it on the safety board. That there is a list of emergencies of the day, so that on any given day you can just look at it and you see, today is the 12th of the month and it's a I don't know, magneto failure, or something like that, or trim failure. And you just and that's a checklist, for instance, I put on the list because it's not something you want to review very often. A second one would be, like, some people asked, we were in a Cessna 182, so a airplane with a variable pitch propeller, and they were like, one of the techniques, and it's kind of, at this point I call it a varsity move, would have been to pull the prop to find pitch, because it would use less drag.
Way less. Yeah.
Yeah. So it creates way less drag. The reality is we were kind of making between 1,500 down to 1,200 RPM. So I thought through that, and I was like, wait a minute, like we were milking that motor for everything it had. And it reminds me of also some accident reports. I used to love the AOPA There I Was series, where people were like, I've heard it before. is a partial power loss is very insidious, and like you want to milk that airplane and get it to an airfield, and you try to, and I distinctly remember that until Joe was like, "We're not making the airfield," and it was like, "Okay, smack me in the face, like it's not going to happen. Stop trying to think you're going to get to Page, unless you're thinking of a landing spot." But up until that point, I was like, "Ooh, partial power, maybe we'll make it." And it probably was, a distraction in my mind actually that I can think played out a little bit. So
Yeah, and I
having
think
that partial power loss. Oh, go ahead.
yeah. Well, I'll just say that one's an easy one too for CFIs, I think, as for CFIs to include in training. And as it turns out, the majority of engine failures are partial power failures.
Yep.
They're not total engine failures. So it's just one of those areas in training that's so easy to simulate. But
Yep.
to your earlier point about the ABCs, it's we could probably go on. This is one for the CFI meeting.
Yeah.
Love to have you come to the next one. But like once in my career, I had a CFI reach down and shut off the fuel. And had he pulled my power to idle, I would have been like a rock star. I mean, I would have been airfield best, airspeed, best field, check systems, done my flows, pulled my checklist, doing that. I mean, I would have looked check ride ready.
Yeah.
But the minute I saw the fuel flow hit zero, I didn't do any of that. I said, the fuel flow's at zero, dude. That's real. I didn't do that, And we started and I started just talking about it, and he just sat there silently until he kind of looked down at the floor at the fuel selector. So, it's just one of those things, like you said, Joe, you never know how you're going to react, and,
Yep.
and
So I
those
want to
types of things are almost impossible to train for, was my last point on it.
Yeah, well, so I want to go back to those as kind of like those would be pro moves, right? And
Yeah.
ideally, you want to. And I'm used to a background where I want to debrief to perfection, but it's not realistic.
Right.
So the reality is we didn't have oil in the airplane. So I was talking to Ben, and he's an A&P, and he reminded me, he's like, "Your prop wouldn't have done anything because without oil pressure, you're not going to be able to manage your prop." So that was a kind of a and then I started thinking about like, well, maybe we were close to zero thrust and all that kind of stuff. But, now I'm doing, math and geometry and physics, and there's no place for that, when you're in the middle of flying. So,
Yeah.
so the reality was, I think we together safely did what was probably best at the time. And maybe short of hitting his brakes a little bit quicker, it was all probably what was the right thing at that moment.
Yeah. Well, all that sounds very minor. I mean, those are the kinds of things where if that's all you're worried about, at the end of the day, you guys did almost everything right. So.
Well, we just were focused on, trying to make the mesa, right? Because the options, we had a rock wall straight ahead,
Yep.
and sides of a mesa that were cliffs. So,
Yep.
I just wanted to, we both just wanted to make it to that darn mesa. And then you can, do all the other whatever, but it was about getting to that.
Yeah, well, you did. You guys hit it. I know you had to make a right turn, but you hit it pretty well smack in the center.
Well, anything other than us, if we hadn't made the mesa, it would have been a whole different day.
Oh, I know. You can see, I don't know, Fernando, if you were the one that had the clip of lifting off in the helicopter.
Yeah.
You can kind of see it when I'm circling you guys, but yeah, there's nothing around you but rock boulders.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That hits me. And it another one of those things that's in my mental gymnastics since then is the how it way could have been worse. But it reminds me of stuff that I like to normally teach, and especially when I'm giving safety meetings at our flying club that I work with, is actually the series of things that you do right, because you have, in my mind, I like to always focus it on, you have good habit patterns, you're doing disciplined flying. There's tons of mistakes that happen every day, but you do enough things right because you have those habit patterns and you are disciplined.
Yeah.
That it kind of leads you to at least the best possible outcome. And in this case, we had this one. So that's what I say to myself, Joe, to snap back from that one. Because that pops into my brain quite a bit too. But you look, and yeah, I don't want to think about going off the edge of that cliff.
Yeah. Yeah, well, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I think for all of us, we're stronger for hearing this story and for having you guys get through it safely. Even just in terms of having a spot in mind to go to, as you fly. It's that Richard Anderson sort of, this is going to be the future. Oh, I got lucky. It's not the future. No, it's going to be the future now. Oh, I got lucky. It's not the future. Fantastic job. I'm really proud of both of you guys. And Thanks for the debrief.